But the conclusion was that history could only be what it is if it were the enunciatory phase of something even more dramatic. In other words, nature without history is a tree standing alone on the horizon. History is the quaking of that tree for unseen and mysterious reasons. It means that nature, after abiding on this planet in organic form for 500 million years, makes a decision to make a sudden move left into a whole new domain. There hasn't been an experiment of this grandiosity since amphibians began intoxicating themselves on brief gulps of air. In other words, history, and this has to be explained, but I love it because it seems to me it sums the whole thing up. History is the shockwave of eschatology. What that means is that history is not pushed from behind, from the past, from the Big Bang or World War II or the Nixon administration or any of that. History is pulled by the future. The human adventure in time is under the control of an attractor that lies ahead of us in the story, not behind us in the story. And the curious plottedness that haunts our lives, that we call synchronicity or magic or good luck, is in fact the high walls of the attractor, the high walls of the groove in which the story must run, for no other reason than it has already run in it for so long. Well, once you have this notion of an attractor at the end of time, then you can do one of two things with it. You can sanitize it and escape its implications by saying that it's a billion years in the future, 100,000 years in the future, 10,000 years in the future. These are ways of saying, don't worry, keep working, keep punching the clock, keep pulling that voting lever, keep buying those hair care and body products. Don't give it a thought. But now, the other course you can take is to make a sign for yourself which says repent or something like that, the key phrase being, for the end is near. And then we have a place for you. There's a large park in the City of London where you're welcome to push this point of view along with other points of view. And this is the path that I chose, simply because I always have had a hard time telling a good investment from a bad one. And it takes the pressure off, you're right. It seems to me that the signs are all around us. You don't have to be a psychedelic aficionado. You don't have to be a fan of the maelstrom at the end of time to notice that we are making it very difficult for ourselves to continue with business as usual by replicating like fleas, by cutting down the forests, by instilling in every tiny beating heart of us the desire for a Mercedes, a triple-car garage, and a house in Saint-Tropez. By doing these things, in a practical and material assessment of the situation, we are making ordinary history impossible. And the ordinary political response is to get quite dithered about all of this. And I share that dithering up to a point. up to a point, because I am, however nutty my theories, I am personally a rationalist, in the sense that I think, you know, nutty theories may end up being right, but they have to be tried on the same anvil of the rules of evidence of any other theory. In other words, it isn't the testimony of people who lives in trailer courts that will secure this or any other point of view. It's you know, investigatable facts and reproducible results. That's why I've always been so fond of psychedelics, because it was miracle by demand. You know, I mean, you may believe in flying saucers, but produce one under pressure. It can't be done. Where the skeptics of the psychedelic experience are incredibly careful about avoiding direct contact with the matter under investigation. Their very fastidiousness in this department should be a clue to you as to what respect they hold these things in. So, by a vicus mode of recirculation, two ideas. One, the idea that interacting with psychoactive plants in a kind of symbiotic relationship propelled a higher animal into self-reflecting consciousness, language, and culture. And two, a deeper idea, a more universal idea, a longer shot, granted. And that is that the weirdness of human history is actually an anticipatory phase to a kind of transition of dimension that organic life is on the brink of undergoing. And that the reason we are so peculiar, so self-contradictory, so, you know, Thomas Hobbes said, man to man is like unto an errant beast, and man to man is like unto a god. And the reason for this paradox, I think, is that history, which lasts, let's be generous, 25,000 years, the most interesting part in the last 10, it happens in the wink of an eye. And yet we individuals, our lives are so ephemeral that for us 10,000 years is 3,000 generations. And so for us it's very prolonged. But if we had the view of the good Lord or friendly eternal extraterrestrials, we would see that the glaciers melted 22,000 years ago, and then there was scrambling, and then there was space flight, global culture, cybernetic networks, DNA sequencing, and what is the question? The technosphere, the biosphere, the cultural sphere, which Teilhard de Chardin called the noosphere, is in a state of forced self-transformation. We're undergoing, and by we, I don't know where the we stops. Is it smart white people, all mammals, all life, everything right down to the atoms of the planet? We are all in the grip of a transformative attractor, an attractor which over very long periods of time produced stable biosystems, oceans and jungles full of life. Over a very short period of time, thousands of years, has produced human civilizations, art movements, dynastic families, languages, migrations, and since 1945, pick a number, we have been in a kind of hyper-accelerated phase where culture has not changed that much. What has changed is technology. Technology is now evolving at such a rate. I was saying to someone today, we don't even have software that pushes our hardware to its limits. No one now knows the limits of our hardware. It's a software writer's challenge to even find the edge of what these machines can do. But it isn't, and I want to stress this, it isn't something that we are doing. It isn't something that is being driven by a human, political, or social agenda. It is that we, like the dolphins, like the groundhogs, like the giant squid and the honeybee, we are embedded in the matrix of physics, of the actual underlying facts of this local structure of this universe. And what has happened is we are on a collision course with something we can't even describe or imagine. We have a vocabulary of things you can run into. You can run into other planets, bad weather, large asteroids, mercenary or missionary extraterrestrials, so forth and so on. What we are about to run into is none of the above, something much more peculiar. Let's call it hyperdimensional white hole. Let's call it a mirror traveling backward at the speed of light through time. Let's call it, last week's laundry list. Whatever you call it, the point is it's going to blow your mind. And at this point in time, the only anticipation is in recourse to these shamanic experiences of boundary dissolution that we are calling psychedelic and stigmatizing furiously as a kind of social heresy. It is a kind of social heresy, because real heresies are always about a truck with truths that don't want to be articulated, that are literally unthinkable or unsayable. And this is the kind situation in which we find ourselves, suspended halfway between the animal and the transcendental. At the end of the 20th century, with all the contradictions of Western civilization seething in our laps, it now turns out that there is a kind of redemption that hovers in an intermediate space between secular and religious. It isn't the return of the goddess. It isn't divine retribution. It's the laws of physics seem to be about to rescue us from ourselves. And in fact, our entire career through time has been at the whim of an imploding set of physical laws. That's worth a drink. So I don't think anyone would give me the time of day were it not for the fact that what's waiting at the end of the road I'm describing has been repeatedly visited in one form or another by many, many people. These psychedelic voyagers. People have been there, done that. They have seen the end. You know, Plato said time is the moving image of eternity. Time is the moving image of eternity. Shamanism is a worldwide technique, 50,000 years old if it's 2 weeks old, that is designed for the specific purpose of entering into something called eternity, or the dream time, or other place. In many, many languages, the word for shaman translates as go-between. A shaman is someone who can move between the culturally validated, linguistically created world of the tribal entity and the something else, the unspeakable, that lies outside of cultural values, outside of cultural convention, is only accessed in dream and in symbolic activities such as dance, chanting, trance. As rationalists, we have tended to dismiss these phenomena as stemming from the unconscious, stemming from epistemological naivete on the part of these people. Brother, if that isn't bullshit put down on somebody who you don't understand, you just say, well, you're epistemologically naive, and That's why I look like an idiot to you. In a sense, this is, I think, what we were always born for. It's very clear that we are the creatures of the imagination, that at some very early point, now lost back there in the orgiastic primal African past, we moved into the domain of symbolic activity, being able to evoke for each other pictures in our heads with small mouth noises. And out of that, we have woven the fabric of material civilization, which is our great accomplishment, this multiphasic, multi-adaptable enterprise that we are involved in that is unlike anything other biological species undertakes anywhere. We learned to do this, and technology, which some people are phobic of and other people tend to think of as epiphenomenal, I think is entirely central to what is going on. Technology begins with language. Language is the neatest, cleanest, least polluting, most non-toxic technology ever developed. Of course, it has some fairly toxic consequences because you can download some pretty mother-heavy ideas into language, like how to build hydrogen bombs or get rid of the Jews or something like that. All of these ideas have ridden on the back of language, but language in and of itself is a perfect model for technology. And arriving some little while after the invention of language, depending on whose libretto you're reading, comes writing. Writing is clearly a technology, and it's a technology for what? For freezing thought, for downloading information into a non-degradable medium, for perfect recall. It's the long road to digitizing begins with writing. And our relationship to the past, which is time, notice, changes with these technologies. Language was clearly a strategy for binding time. That's what you do with it. That's why we live in a different kind of time world than the animals do. They don't refer back to the time when I encountered a threat exactly like this one. Substitute that kind of process with instinct. But as we moved away from instinct, we moved into these information-based technologies, writing, then the book, and in our own time, an explosion of technologies that have frozen all time. I mean, we now know from movies like Forrest Gump that people who never even lived at the same time can mingle together in the collective cultural memory. Marilyn Monroe can have an affair with Albert Einstein in cyberspace. What it means to both of them since they're dead, I'm not sure. But what it means to the rest of us is whatever we make of it. So technology has this curious accelerating quality that is so important now as we approach what I call the transcendental object at the end of time. It is being mirrored in our machines, in the machines that we are creating. And the most dramatic machines that we are creating, completely unhindered by the petty bourgeois and its concerns, hour by hour, day by day, around the clock, an enormous invisible technology is knitting itself into existence. And it doesn't change the look of the landscape, but it is drawing together human beings to the point where all minds on the planet are simultaneously inhabiting a cultural superspace. This is called the Internet, the World Wide Web. And what it is it's a recreation through engineering technology of the kind of telepathic, archaic social space that we lived in before the fall into history. History is a huge downer. It literally was the state of mind that rushed in to fill the vacuum when, through the abandonment of psychedelics, we broke the connection with the Gaian mind. And now, strange to say, at the very apex of this process of alienation and technological entrancement, we're finding that technology can be a mirror for Gaian intent, that we can't manage ourselves without genuflecting to these higher levels of managerial coordination that the internet makes possible. I think, in a way, what we're doing is we're erasing the boundaries between technology and nature. The internet now is something which runs along telephone lines and is transduced through computers. But in 15 years, those computers will be simply black patches pasted on the back of your fingernails. The entire infrastructure, the technical appurtenances that protrude into three-dimensional space can be turned into prosthetic implants and earwax and who knows what else, and serve us very diligently in that form. So it's very clear that visually we are returning to an archaic mode, but carrying with us all the presuppositions of technological existence. And I'm not sure whether we can maintain our hold on the human form, or whether we will even want to. There's a great bifurcation ahead for the managerial community. Let's assume it exists, for God's sake. And that bifurcation is, we're going to have to make a decision about human nature. To wit, is this our home to be cherished and nurtured, an incredible pearl flung out in a universe of ashes and darkness? Or is this a hell world, a tiny confining prison at the edge of a dying universe from which it is our destiny to break free and recover our higher and hidden nature from which we have become separated? It's very hard to see how we're able to massage the data so we can have it both ways. And yet, you know, this is a choice which as a culture we face. Are we to go into the divine imagination and create, you know, starships the size of Manitoba that will ply between here and Andromeda and exist in a world of our complete syntactical self-expression? Or is man's place humbler than that? Is that grandiose, steeped with megalomania, touched with the kind of political taint that's had us raping and pillaging ever since we got out of those miserable icebound villages in Jutland or wherever it was? Is it that? Or is it our challenge and our destiny? It's really a choice about human nature, and who knows, there may be enough activity in the mix that we can divide the tribe. You know, a meek shall inherit the earth deal, and where the other people go is not said. But